You're starting law school this fall under very uncertain circumstances.
Yep.
How are you feeling about that, not knowing, or do you know what it's going to be?
So I don't know. I know that a lot of schools have yet to announce, and a lot of them are playing it by ear. So I am in a really unique situation in that I'm going to be in the evening program at Georgetown. So I will be working full time and going to law school in, Monday through Thursday in the evenings. For someone like me, I'm actually looking forward to having more flexibility around my class schedule and how accessible it's going to be for me. So for folks that are looking for a more traditional experience in law school, I think it can be a huge letdown, because to me, one of the kind of biggest aspects and the biggest selling points of law school generally is the network of people that you're going to meet there. And if, everything for your first year, which is arguably, at least from what I've heard, one of the hardest years, everything is online and you don't have that kind of collective struggle with your classmates, I think it can have a kind of negative impact on someone's overall law school experience. So I'm also concerned about the learning curve and how difficult it's going to be to acclimate myself to my first year and not being able to go to office hours or not being able to, have my professors see me face to face. And that's definitely something that I'm worried about. But overall, I think I'm as zen as I can be about it. So
That's good. I mean, that's all you can do. Have they communicated anything specific about helping you through that transition?
So they may have. I haven't seen anything super specific quite yet. I mean, so I do appreciate that Georgetown has sent out a lot of e-meetings or, webinars and things like that, or they'll host discussions on Zoom and things like that. But I haven't gotten any specifics quite yet. And I do think, and mind you, this may have gone out, I just may not have caught wind of it. I think the assumption is that students already have access to Zoom, or there hasn't been much communication around, if you don't have Zoom already, here are some student resources, or, I don't know if Zoom has any student discounts or anything like that, but I think going forward, that's going to be either a barrier for students or something that universities are going to need to work out. So.
Interesting. Well, I mean, my understanding would be that the university is paying for the Zoom accounts of their professors. Like they would have some sort of enterprise plan, but the Zoom app itself it's free. I think it's just a question of the students downloading it.
Yeah, but you have a slightly limited, you have limited features with the free version. That's my concern, is that if you want to, for example, have post a study group and you want to use those features on Zoom that I think students are likely going to have to use, you'll get timed out after 40 minutes if you don't have, for example, the paid version of Zoom. So I think as someone who really values tech generally, I do see there being some barriers in free versions of Zoom versus the paid version of Zoom, and then there not necessarily being a bridge for students between those two things.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's true. There is that limit. And so the university presumably should have some sort of way to provide students with an account that would allow study groups of more than two people.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that seems really important. And then also maybe
and if it's more than two, it timing out, I don't know if I could have that, and even if, for example, you want to do office hours with a professor, I'm sure no professor wants to talk to one student for 40 minutes. But, for example, just having that option or something.
Right. And what about, so professors teaching online? I would imagine that it doesn't translate exactly as it should. It's a different experience.
I would imagine so. So I did some outreach to current Georgetown law students who gave me some mixed reviews on what their experiences were like, kind of switching to online for the past semester. And for example, one student said that their professor restructured the entire class to be centered more towards online teaching, and that worked really well, versus another professor who didn't necessarily make those efforts, and the experience was not a good one for them. So it was a little more challenging. I also fear, and this may not be the most kosher thing to say, but I fear generational knowledge in terms of knowing how to operate certain technology or having it just come as a second nature. And typically college professors tend to be a little bit older, and this doesn't necessarily come to them naturally like it will to, for example, someone who may be a little bit younger, and that could be challenging for them, and that could inherently make it more challenging for students to do well in that class. So
yeah, I would certainly imagine so. And I'm curious to learn more about the professor who restructured their class for an online setting or context. Do you know anything more about how exactly they did that?
I don't know. I didn't ask too many specifics, and mostly just from the perspective of this wasn't someone that I knew very, very well. And I was just asking, at least from the perspective of there seems to be a lot going on, how was it to finish with an online semester? And she just mentioned that, it's basically, it can go really well or it can be awful. And then there also can be professors that just really, for example, just aren't in tune with online learning generally, and who don't necessarily take it as seriously. And that could be the same experience with students too. So this is not to put all of the blame on professors in any way. But that's another, I think, complication. And another thing that she mentioned is that she didn't feel like her professor took online learning as seriously as they did in-person learning.
Right. Well, I would imagine that most professors just do the same thing year after year. If they're on the older side, they've already been teaching for a decade or more. Why wouldn't they just teach the same curriculum since very little changes?
Exactly. Yeah.
I did talk to one professor who talked about using breakout rooms in Zoom to really change up the setting. And I thought that sounded kind of cool to facilitate relationships between students.
Yeah, breakout rooms are, as someone who's been working on Zoom for the past 3 months, like breakout rooms can be extremely helpful. And even in terms of, especially if professors are leading those, that kind of breaks down one of the barriers in terms of access with Zoom features, because if professors are the ones with those paid accounts and they create the breakout rooms for students, then that's not something that they have to worry about paying for or, having the resources to be able to facilitate. So I think that would be extremely helpful.
Yeah. I feel like they kind of have to change it up, because if they just lecture, then why not teach that class once and only once, record it, and then no need for it ever again. Then you can do the flipped classroom thing in the future.
Sure. I guess, and this is, very limited knowledge here, but I'm guessing some of the cases that they look over would change by year. But I agree that, if why reinvent the wheel, especially if you can record a class and show that to students as well. And that also, there's been a lot of kind of pushback from students generally, and not just law students, on paying full tuition and having an online experience that you didn't initially anticipate, that you didn't sign up for. And I know that other students I've heard have been concerned around like housing and how do they figure that out. So for example, for the first semester, if they don't have to attend classes in person, what is the point in them moving to campus? And, how do they even set up a living situation without, having those typical, if you want to live off campus without having those typical resources kind of already there and available for you.
How are you personally handling that? Or do you already live in the area?
Yeah, so I already live in DC. I've been here for 10 years. And that's part of what made me choose Georgetown was pure convenience. And even kind of entertaining the thought of going to a different school and moving to a different city just during a pandemic seemed mentally and physically exhausting. And I was like, if I could stay in the same area, keep my job, kind of figure out everything as I go, but have some sense of familiarity, I think that makes my overall experience potentially more positive. And that's how I'm handling it. I handle it by choosing what was the most convenient thing for me at the time. So
nice. And Georgetown's also not a bad school.
It's really not bad. Yeah, exactly. It's nothing to sneeze at. So
have you heard anything about the Harvard 1L law school prep online?
So I've heard a little bit about it. So we have a student Slack, and through the grapevine, I've heard that they may make that resource, like their prep materials, available for other law schools. I'm not sure, and I haven't read into the specifics on whether that has actually been the case, but I did see some buzz about it in our evening student Slack. So.
Yeah, it's funny. What I've heard is that like Harvard Law was going to charge for it, but perhaps due to coronavirus, they're making it free this year specifically, but they want to sell it directly to other law schools. Mm-hmm. So it's only available through the schools. So like you would only get it if Georgetown decided to buy into that.
Right, which I'm fine with. I feel like, every law school has probably, I'm assuming this, every law school has their own prep week or prep materials or what have you. And I've signed up for a couple of them. I've signed up for one through Georgetown. I've signed up signed up for another one through Barbary, which somehow like a law firm is paying for me to do. So like, I think there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, and if they're going to be free, I'm going to take them. So.
Have you like looked at any of them yet, or how much do you plan to use that sort of thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, as someone, and I know there's going to be a learning curve, and I know at least from everyone I've talked to about law school, L1 year is the worst. And it can be mentally, physically, it's just exhausting in more ways than one. So I haven't gotten my books for the Barbary online course yet. They actually don't even offer them in person right now because of COVID. And then the Georgetown one is, I'm assuming, going to be a virtual learning experience the first week before the semester starts. So even if they're virtual, I'm going to be taking both of them. I can't say like which one I think is going to be more useful. I think the only reason the Georgetown one may be more useful is if they are educating me about the layout of the campus. For example, like if you need to get XYZ done, this is the building that you go to, or something along the lines of that. But I'm gonna take all the free resources that I can. So
yeah, sure, why not? And if it's recorded, are these recorded videos or are they live?
So they, I think, do have live versions for some of the Barbary courses, but my understanding is that they are pre-recorded, which again, kind of messes with the value for some of these things, or changes the value, at least from a student perspective. But I know that the Georgetown one is going to be live if they do a virtual learning kind of atmosphere rather than in person.
I guess that would also be cool to give you more of a taste of what the actual semester is going to be like.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll take that. I mean, again, there's so many unknowns about everything surrounding COVID. And it's actually terrifying to be going into law school at a time where like, it's most people can't even leave their own homes. So some sense of even baby certainty is all I need. So.
Yeah, well, I guess at least you've got a little bit of that by not having to move, not changing apartments, not changing your city. That reduces quite a bit of it. I hear from people who are like, I don't know whether to put down a security deposit on a lease.
Right. Yeah. And even the little things like finding, if you're, for example, not planning to live on campus and you need to find a landlord off of campus, that becomes so much harder than it would have normally been. And even, for example, seeing an apartment and having to see that virtually and not being able to, like, for example, test out, like, is the water pressure good? Do I have, like, does this, virtual representation of this apartment look like what it actually is in person? There's just, it's a whole mess.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll know more soon, and schools will make decisions soon and give some certainty, or at least allow flexibility for online, at least for the fall semester.
Yeah, I think so. But even from, again, outside of the law school's perspective, my understanding is that schools are, may bring back just certain students. Like, for example, they may bring back just 1 year of students, or just one cohort of students rather than all of the students all at once, or they may do like staggered, it's super complicated. And I know, for example, like I work for a member in Massachusetts, a member of Congress in Massachusetts, and one of the colleges and universities there is discussing bringing back only freshman students and only senior students, and kind of leaving their juniors and seniors in that limbo. So I'm really interested to see how, like, Georgetown specifically is going to do that, and how other law schools are going to figure that space out. So
yeah, I feel like everyone's going to be different.
Right, exactly.
A good opportunity to experiment, I guess.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.